Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And welcome and congratulations to arriving at your very last lecture of the semester. I know it's a good feeling to be wrapping things up. I think we all feel a bit fatigued, so thank you for coming out this morning. In spite of the fact that, you're just about ready to take your final lab exam of the term. So thanks for your willingness to be here today. So, okay, welcome back. I hope you are doing well. And so we're going to do our best to cover some major ideas in chapter 16. I may not finish everything. I think it's likely that I won't finish everything during our conversation this morning. Whatever I don't finish verbally to you here this morning, I may in fact add a little bit of additional notes to the note-taking document that I send out to you through Wiley Plus, okay? But I definitely will not hold you any longer than 9:15 today because I know that you need to take that lab exam, okay? So at 9:30, please log on to classmarker.com, take your third and final lab exam of the term. And once you're done with that, you can stand up and scream and shout because you have finished the lab portion of your curriculum and it's all over for this semester. So well done, folks. Well done. Okay, do you have any questions before we get started here this morning? Okay, let me remind you, I know you know, but let me just remind you anyway, that your final exam is a week from today. That is the third lecture exam of the term. The study guide is available on Wiley Plus. Your third lecture exam is Wednesday, December 15th at 8 a.m. Okay. Wednesday, December 15th at 8 a.m. is your final exam. Okay. And so, please be advised that starting next week, I won't be holding traditional office hours. Okay, during final exam week, I will not have office hours, but I still will be monitoring email on a daily basis. So if there's a question that comes up during your study time, write me an email out and you will get a response from me. Okay. So any questions? All right, gang, hang in there. We're going to take a lot of notes today. As always, you want to pay attention, but it's not critical that you understand necessarily everything in this moment because you're going to have a week of preparation after today, okay? So you can do this. All right, so I'm going to share my screen with you. At the end of last class, we were talking about proprioceptors, okay? And we had documented muscle spindles, tendon organs, and I believe we stopped there. I added joint kinesthetic receptors at the end of class last time. And so I'm not going to come back around and talk about this because honestly, medical science doesn't know too much about joint kinesthetic receptors. It's a very small topic that this chapter talks about. So if you know basically what I put into your notes, you will be fine, okay? You will be fine. So I wanted to start fresh today with another major theme of chapter 16, which is the somatic sensory pathways. So I'm starting in chapter 16 at section 16.3, section 16.3 in your textbook. It's got a big bold heading there, somatic sensory pathways. Okay. All right, let's get started. The somatic sensory pathways, they do what I think you already know. They function to relay information from the somatic sensory receptors to the primary somatosensory area of your brain, which you already know, I think you know, is the post-central gyrus of the cerebrum, the post-central gyrus of the cerebrum. So somatic sensory pathways function to relay information from somatic sensory receptors, right? And we just put a long list of those receptors in your notes last time, to the primary somatosensory pathway, to the primary somatosensory area, which is the post-central gyrus in the parietal lobe of the cerebral cortex and to the cerebellum. Okay, so lots of words here. The somatic sensory pathways function to relay information from the somatic sensory receptors all throughout your body, all throughout your anatomy, to the post-central gyrus in the parietal lobe of the cerebral cortex and to the cerebellum. If you don't remember, I hope you do, but if you don't remember what the post-central gyrus is, you can identify it by going back in your textbook to figure 14.15. 14.15 would show it to you if you don't have visible body accessible, figure 14.15. Now, that brings up a small talking point. During today's lecture, there may be moments where I reference figures, particularly in chapter 14. Chapter 14 is not a chapter that we have formally covered in lecture, but we've covered a lot of the anatomy of chapter 14 in lab, okay? So it might be helpful to have access to chapter 14, if you can bookmark it or something in your digital textbook. Figure 14.15 is pretty important. Okay, so let's continue here. All right, so the somatosensory pathways are actually composed of thousands of groups of 3 neurons. Thousands of groups of 3 neurons. That might seem like an odd statement, particularly if you haven't had the luxury of reading into chapter 16 yet, but it is nonetheless correct. The pathways themselves, from an architecture perspective, from an anatomical perspective, what is the anatomy that makes up these somatosensory pathways? Well, these pathways are made of regions of anatomy that have 3 neurons linked to each other as they go from wherever the somatosensory receptor is, such as your fingertip, the whole way into your brain, okay? So thousands of groups of 3 neurons. Okay, so we're going to talk about what these, these mysterious 3 neurons are. Okay, so we have the first order neurons, which I mentioned in lecture last time. The first order neurons, these neurons conduct the nerve impulses from the somatic sensory receptors into the brainstem or spinal cord, okay? Basically getting it into the anatomy of the central nervous system. Now from your time in lab that the brainstem sits on top of the spinal cord. For our purposes, they're basically one continuous fleshy piece of tissue, but formally speaking, the spinal cord is going to be everything below the medulla oblongata, which you know about because you're getting ready to take your exam at 9:30. So the first order neurons carry the electrical signals from wherever the sensation is perceived into the brainstem or spinal cord. Second order neurons, well, second order neurons are exactly the kind of cell you might guess. These are interneurons. They are interneurons. They are the bridging cells. They are the go-between, the intermediary cells. Second order neurons, which are a type of interneuron that transmit impulses from the brainstem or spinal cord to the thalamus, okay? You may recall during our time studying the anatomy of the brain in lab that your thalamus is basically equivalent to the telephone switchboard operator, rerouting calls between people, okay? It is the router of the brain in terms of more modern technology. You have internet access, so you wouldn't be online with me right now, so you very likely have a modem, a router, okay, that directs electronic traffic to various digital devices in your home. Well, that's the thalamus, gang, okay? So one thing to take note of, and we'll be talking about this a little bit deeper later on, is, you know, as you look at, say, figure 16.5, let me ask you a question in the chat window. So take a look at figure 16.5. First off, we need to know that you're looking at the correct piece of anatomy. So in figure 16.5, what color is the second neuron, second order neuron? What color is the second order neuron? Okay, do you see it there? Figure 16.5. Okay, thank you, Kendall and Shay. Karen, great job. Just so we know that we're looking at the right thing, the common thing we're talking about. Okay, so in figure 16.5, you can see that the second order neuron is color-coded purple in your textbook. And what I want to point out to you is that as you look at that section of the spinal cord, notice that the purple second order neuron starts on the left side of the image, and then it crosses over to the right side of that section of spinal cord anatomy. Do you notice that the purple neuron starts on the left and it migrates towards the right? Do you see what I'm talking about here? Starts on the left, goes to the right. So for example, and I'll put this in the chat window, notice that the second order neuron basically synapses at a region called the nuclei of the medulla, the nuclei of the medulla. Do you see the nuclei of the medulla, folks? Okay, great, great. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, everybody. All right. So again, I'm just highlighting that the second order neuron starts on the left side of the spinal cord picture, and it goes over to the right side. That is a very common feature of second order neurons in somatic sensory pathways, where they start on one side of the spinal cord. It may not always be the left side, it might be the right side. They might start on the right side and go over to the left. They might start on the left side and go over to the right. The point is that second order neurons commonly cross over, and that observation, that characteristic, that phenomenon is known as decussation. Decussation. Okay, so I'm going to put a little talking point in right here. Note that before reaching the thalamus, second order neurons, okay, so this is a first order neuron with a hyphen, second order neurons with a hyphen. Second order neurons decussate, which means cross over to the opposite side. Okay, and I point that out as a visible way that you can identify second order neurons. Okay, when you're looking at the diagrams of chapter 16, the various figures, figure 16.5, 16.6, and the other ones, what is a common characteristic is that you will notice the second order neurons start on one side and go over to the opposite side. So that is one way that you can help ensure you're looking at a second order neuron. Okay, now, you know, a reasonable question and a long-standing question in medical science is, why do second order neurons cross over? What's the purpose of doing that? You know, it's kind of like the old joke, why does the chicken cross the road? And in the joke, there's lots of possible answers for why a chicken might cross the road, and some of them are funny and some of them aren't. But the honest truth is, in terms of why does the second order neuron cross the road? Why does it decussate? The answer is still a mystery. We do not know why Mother Nature designed this anatomy this way. There's no obvious physiological reason why this would need to happen this way. Okay, so it is a medical mystery. We may never know why this is taking place. Okay, why do second order neurons decussate? We don't know, folks. We just have to be honest, throw up our hands, say we don't know. I will say, though, if you take a comparative anatomy course at some moment in your life where you compare the anatomy of a dog to a dolphin, to a bear, to a turtle, to a human, you know, whatever animals are being used in the comparative anatomy course, you will notice that Mother Nature very frequently does this. So decussation is a phenomenon that is observable in animal life across the planet. It just seems to be how our nervous systems evolved on the planet. Okay. And as I said, you know, people have been thinking about this for a long time, and there just is no clear-cut answer as to why Mother Nature did it this way. Okay. So we have first order neurons that carry the sensory information into the spinal cord. Second order neurons are going to take the information from the spinal cord or brainstem to the thalamus. As they do so, the neuron as a cell itself will decussate. It will cross over to the opposite side of the spinal cord. Next, we have the third order neurons. Okay. Third order neurons are also a type of interneuron. They transmit information from the thalamus to the primary somatosensory area, which again is a post-central gyrus of the cerebral cortex on the same side of the body that the third order neuron is physically located on. Okay. This is a type of interneuron that transmits impulses, nerve impulses from the thalamus to the primary somatosensory area, again, post-central gyrus of the cerebral cortex on the same side of the body as the third order neuron. Okay, so hopefully when you look at a picture like figure 16.4, you can identify the blue color, first order neuron, the purple color, second order neuron, and the green colored third order neuron. So the somatosensory pathways are made of thousands of these groups of 3 neurons that are running parallel to each other up the spinal cord, into the brainstem, and up to the higher order brain structures we've discussed. Okay. Any questions right now? You know, it is my hope that, these conversations here make enough sense so that when you start interpreting your study guide for your final exam, you have all the tools necessary to complete your preparations for your final exam. That's what my goal is, and hopefully we will have some success here. Okay, let's continue. All right, so there are three general somatosensory pathways that send information to the cerebral cortex. They're given special names, and we need to document these in your notes. Okay, first we have the pathway, which I've already alluded to. I had you look at figure 16.5. It is the posterior column medial lemniscus, and that a nice word, lemniscus pathway. Posterior column medial lemniscus pathway. What a mouthful. Figure 16.5 again. Okay, so the groups of 3 neurons that are part of this anatomy of this pathway, they are responsible for transmitting sensory information for touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious proprioception. The fact that you know exactly consciously right now where your right big toe is from the limb, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex. Okay. Responsible for transmitting sensory information for touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious proprioception from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex. Okay. So let me ask you in the chat window, just so you're looking at the right thing. Here we go. Well, in figure 16.5, what color is the posterior column? If you look at figure 16.5, what color is it? Okay. All right, you got it, folks. Easy peasy, right? You got it. This is a light blue color. Okay, a light blue color. And so you can appreciate that the posterior column, which is artificially color-coded blue in your textbook, obviously you're looking at a region of your white matter of the spinal cord that makes up a posterior artificially defined segment, tube, column of neuronal tissue that is organized in bands of fibers that have 3 neurons, as we've talked about, first order, second order, third order neurons that are bundled together to form a cylindrical column, a cylindrical tube of neural tissue that goes up the spinal cord. Okay, that's what we're looking at right now. Okay, so axons that facilitate communication through this pathway form an anatomical structure in the spinal cord called the posterior column. Okay. The posterior column itself is made of certain things that we could talk about. I'm really truly not going to beat you up about this kind of thing on your final exam, but I do want you to have some conscious awareness of these things. Okay, the posterior column itself are made of substructures of neurons that form things called the gracillae and the cuneate fasciculus. The gracillae and the cuneate fasciculus. Okay. Yeah, I don't have, let's see, there's not really a good picture of these things. So I'll simply mention it and move on. Don't worry about, getting horrendously tested on these very obscure terms. So axons that facilitate communication through this pathway form an anatomical structure in the spinal cord called the posterior column. Okay. And the medial lemniscus. Okay, medial lemniscus is shown to you on figure 16.4, even though it's not color coded. Do you see the phrase medial lemniscus? Okay. So the term lemniscus is actually of Greek origin. The term lemniscus is of Greek origin, and it basically is a Greek way of referring to a ribbon or band of material. So, literally a ribbon that you might tie a bow with. Now, obviously, you're not tying a bow in the spinal cord, but a ribbon or a band of tissue is a lemniscus, okay? Okay, so the axons that facilitate communication through the posterior column medial lemniscus pathway form an anatomical structure in the spinal cord called the posterior column and the medial lemniscus. Okay, so I'll underline those two things. And I'll correct the spelling on my notes. Okay, so that's figure 16.5. Okay, be aware of the pathway, be aware of where it is. If you saw a picture of it on an exam, you'd be able to interpret it, right? Things like this. So, okay, let's keep rolling here. The second pathway is figure 16.6. This is the anterolateral pathway, which is also known as the spinothalamic pathway. So the anterolateral or spinothalamic pathway, this is figure 16.6. Okay, this pathway that you see a picture of in figure 16.6, it is responsible for transmitting sensory information for pain, cold, warmth, itch, and tickle from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex. Okay, so you can see that these pathways are dealing with different sensations, right? So for the posterior column medial lemniscus pathway, we're dealing with touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious proprioception, where from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex, right? This is the pieces of information you're going to want to key off on during your preparations for the final exam. Okay, so let's document this in your notes. The anterolateral pathway is responsible for transmitting sensory information for pain, cold, warmth, itch, and tickle from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head to the cerebral cortex. Okay, so again, the relevant information: anterolateral pathway, pain, cold, warm, itch, and tickle from the limbs, trunk, neck, and posterior head. Okay, so folks, a couple questions in the chat window. Here we go. True or false? The posterior column medial lemniscus pathway would transmit vibration from a power tool held in your hands to the cerebral cortex. You bet, folks. Good job. Absolutely, that is true. Another question along the same lines. The anterolateral pathway would transmit a cold sensation from holding an ice cube in your hands to the cerebral cortex. Is that true or is that false? Okay, you got the idea here, folks. You get the idea of what some of the questions might seem like on your final exam, okay? So good. Let's continue here. The third pathway is going to be figure 16.7. Third pathway is the trigeminothalamic pathway. Okay, this pathway is responsible for transmitting sensory information for tactile, thermal, and pain sensations from the face, nasal cavity, oral cavity, and your teeth to the cerebral cortex. Okay, so again, relevant information: tactile, thermal, and pain sensations from the face, nasal cavity, and teeth to the cerebral cortex. Okay, true or false in the chat window? Here it comes. The pain of a toothache would be transmitted along the anterolateral pathway to the cerebral cortex. Okay, you folks are doing well. You're doing very well. Okay, you're picking up on the right pieces of information that you need to pay attention to. Okay, and so good job. The answer to that last question is definitely false. Okay. All right, one more piece of information about the trigeminothalamic pathway. The axons that facilitate communication. Let's see here. Oh, okay. All right. So actually, hold on a second. Okay. So let me back up a second. There's one note here that I skipped over a little too quickly. Back on figure 16.6, the anterolateral pathway, I simply wanted to point out the spinothalamic tracts, that you see them. So do you see in figure 16.6, the spinothalamic tracts? They're color-coded a light blue. And notice the logic of how your textbook has been organized. In figure 16.5, the posterior column was highlighted a light blue. In figure 16.6, the spinothalamic tract is highlighted a light blue. In other words, in that region, that section of your spinal cord, this is where you're going to find those bundles of 3 neurons moving up the cord through the brainstem and into the higher order areas of your cerebrum and cerebral cortex. This is where the anatomy of the anterolateral pathway exists in the spinal cord. So take note of the spinothalamic tracts that are light blue in that picture. And so once again, going down to figure 16.7, the trigeminothalamic pathway, take a look at where they are positioned as well. Notice the light blue trigeminothalamic tract. Notice that it's being highlighted in a cross section of your pons, which you know is the middle segment of your brain stem. Okay. Take note of the trigeminothalamic tracts. Okay, once again, light blue in figure 16.7. Okay, folks. So hopefully, hopefully you're starting to see a logic to the madness of this content here. Okay, any questions right now? Okay. I am going to put into your notes some pathways that lead to the cerebellum. Your textbook doesn't really give you any pictures or diagrams on this, so we don't have to worry too much about interpreting an image, but at least you should be aware of these things, that they in fact exist. Okay, there are 2 general somatosensory pathways that send information to the cerebellum. They are the anterior spinocerebellar tract and the posterior spinocerebellar tract. Okay. And what I'll say about these is as follows. Both of these tracts that we've just put a name on, both of these tracts convey proprioceptive nerve impulses from muscles and tendons in the trunk and lower limbs to allow the cerebellum to coordinate movement and maintain your sense of posture and balance. Okay, so the relevant information is nerve impulses are coming from the muscles and tendons that are located in the trunk of your body and your lower limbs. Okay. All right, so true or false in the chat window? Here we go. Hold on. Here we go. True or false, nerve impulses from the biceps brachii are sent along the spinocerebellar tracts to the cerebellum. Okay, so I noticed a disagreement in the chat window there. Okay, right, your biceps brachii are in your upper arms, your upper limbs, right? That's an upper limb. So these tracts do not contain neuronal fibers that go to the cerebellum. Okay, so the answer is false because the biceps brachii is a muscle in an upper limb, not a lower limb. Okay, lower limb obviously is your legs, upper limbs are your arms. Okay. All right. It is also perhaps significant, and I'll just mention it here as a talking point. This is one area of your spinal cord where there is no decussation of neurons. Okay, these tracts have neurons that do not decussate. Okay, so the groups of 3 neurons that move information to the cerebellum do not contain any decussating neurons. Again, why don't they? Well, we don't know. We really don't know, but they don't. We've never observed that. Okay. All right, folks. Now let's talk about the control of body movement. The control of body movement. So I'm now in section 16.4, section 16.4. Some of this material, honestly, I'm going to skip over because of time or because I feel like the material is not really mature yet. And by mature, I mean when I read your book, I look at it and say, well, that seems kind of vague and fuzzy, meaning that medical science really doesn't understand this yet. Now, we have to be honest to the limitations of our knowledge, do we not? So let's talk about this a little bit. Control of body movement. Okay. So I'll start with just a general comment here. Okay. All excitatory and inhibitory signals that control movement, they converge on, they come together, they intersect, they converge on motor neurons that extend out of the brain stem and spinal cord as they innervate our skeletal muscles, as you know, many of them on your anatomy. All excitatory and inhibitory signals that control movement converge, means they focus together at a common point on motor neurons that extend out of the brainstem and spinal cord as they innervate skeletal muscles. Okay. And so I'm going to jump in, within section 16.4 of your textbook. There's figure 16.9. Honestly, I look at that and say, well, that's just not too impressive. I'm really not impressed with that information. I think it's kind of still not well understood. So I'm going to move past it. Don't worry about figure 16.9. It's not going to bother you on an exam. I'm going to move you to control of movement by the cerebral cortex. Okay, so in my book, that's page 585. Page 585, control of movement by the cerebral cortex. And here's where we're going to need to highlight some areas that you do know about and one area that you may not know too much about. And it's because, well, we haven't formally covered chapter 14. Well, why didn't we? Well, do you want me to throw another chapter into your reading at this time, right? It's just too much. Okay, but I would tell you the relevant pieces of information to pay attention to. So we need to focus on the premotor area and the primary motor areas of the cerebral cortex. Okay, you already know the primary motor area because that's one of the that's the precentral gyrus that we pointed out in lab. Primary motor area we didn't really talk about, and I'll show you where that is right now. Okay. Okay, so first we have the premotor area. Okay, for this, I'm going to ask you to take a look at figure 14.15 in your book. Okay, let's go back and do that. I'm going to do it with you. So please identify figure 14.15 in your book. 14.15 in your book. Look at figure 14.15. And I'm just going to ask you in the chat window, okay, what color is the premotor area in figure 14.15? What color is it? Okay, I'm going to wait for two more people to tell me color. Okay, great. Thanks, Rachel, Jordan, everybody that contributed. I appreciate it. You can see for yourself that it is in fact orange. So you all have identified, and just just scan your eyes on the rest of that figure 14.15. You notice that the post-central gyrus is colored a dark blue, right? And you know where that piece of brain anatomy is from our time in lab. That's dark blue. That's your post-central gyrus. Post-central gyrus is also the primary somatosensory cortex, okay? The precentral gyrus, you see that's color-coded red. The precentral gyrus is the primary motor area. And now you know where the premotor area is. It's color-coded orange, okay? So now you know where to find this. If you need to look at these things, look at figure 14.15. So in your notes, we're talking about control of movement by the cerebral cortex. So let me define the premotor cortex. The premotor cortex is the area of the cerebrum that is responsible for developing a plan to execute a desire. That's kind of fuzzy language. I'm not too happy with that, but that's how your textbook describes it. A plan to execute a desire created in another area of the cerebrum to move the body. Okay, so if there is a desire, from the post-central gyrus or the precentral gyrus to move the body, then the neurons in the premotor area will develop an execution plan to make that motion a reality. Okay. This area of the cerebrum is responsible for developing a plan of action to move the body in response to a desire to move created in another area of the cerebrum. Okay. This area of the cerebrum is responsible for developing a plan of action to move the body in response to a desire to move created in another area of the cerebrum. And when we take motion for granted, right? I'm sitting here giving you a lecture and I'm moving my hand, moving my arms, and I'm walking back and forth, right? And all that time, I'm not falling over because my cerebellum knows what it's doing, right? So we take this motion for granted, but the neuronal activity that coordinates it and maintains it is unbelievably complicated. And we have only the most infant level understanding of what's really going on here. And this is basically as good as we can say at this time. So let's continue. And so I'm going to try to give you a little bit of an example here. Okay. For example, if you hear a sound and you quote unquote think you want to move toward or away from that sound. Okay, if you hear a sound and you think, okay, now thinking involves electrical activity, right, in the brain and in patterns of electricity and patterns of ion movements that, again, we're only in our infancy of understanding. If you hear a sound and you think you want to move toward or away from whatever caused that sound, the desire to move because you have perceived that sound is formed in the auditory association area of the cerebrum. And so let's see here. I want to show you the auditory association area if I can. Okay, so figure 1415. Please tell me in the chat window, what color is the auditory association area? What color is the auditory association area? Okay, you see, in fact, that's going to be part of your temporal anatomy, right? It's color-coded a light purple there, a light purple. You have it. Okay, so if you hear a sound and you think you want to move away or towards this sound, the desire to move is formed through neuronal activity in the auditory association area of the cerebrum. Okay, that's going to be purple in figure 1415. Okay. From here, from the auditory association area of the cerebrum, nerve impulses are going to be sent to the basal nuclei. Okay, the basal nuclei, let's see here if I can give you just a quick look here at some basal nuclei. Hold on a second. All right, so unfortunately the textbook changed some of its pictures recently, so okay, I don't think I have a good thing to tell you the basal nuclei at this moment. Okay, without losing time, folks, I'm going to move forward since I don't have a good image right now. So from here, nerve impulses are sent to the basal nuclei, okay, then to the thalamus, then to the premotor area, which we've just defined, and you can see the premotor area in figure 1415, which develops a plan of action to coordinate which specific skeletal muscles should contract or relax as you move toward or away from the sound, okay? So it is still a huge goal of scientific investigation to figure out exactly the trajectory of these electrical signals, the paths that they take through the brain, and it's not always a linear path. In fact, Mother Nature doesn't seem to like a linear path from point A to point B in a line. Typically, it's a very circuitous route that the electrical signals move to get to its destination. So you hear this sound, you develop a desire to move in the auditory association area. Nerve impulses are sent from the auditory association area to the basal nuclei, which, sorry, I don't have an immediate picture to show you that. Then to the thalamus, which you do know. Then to the premotor area, which again you know because we've just defined it. In the premotor area, that section of brain is going to develop the plan to coordinate muscle contraction, okay? From the premotor area, nerve impulses are sent to the primary motor area, and then to neurons that innervate these skeletal muscles capable of moving the body. Okay, so we have several important ideas here. We have the auditory association area processing information. We have basal nuclei processing information. We have the thalamus acting as a relay center. We have the premotor area, which is developing your plan of attack here, so to speak. And then we have the primary motor area, right? All of this anatomy is involved in processing your desire to move from the initial sound stimulus that was captured by the anatomy of your ear and coordinating the skeletal muscles that actually have to do the work to move. So you know, if you have read the study guide for the final exam, I'm giving you some scenarios where you're going to have to do your best to form a flow chart of connected ideas of one thing going to another thing, going to another thing. And please let me relieve your anxiety about that. I do not expect perfection because we don't perfectly understand these things. What I am expecting is to see real effort in your answers. I'm expecting real effort to be present, not perfect knowledge to be present, is what I'm telling you. Okay. Questions right now. Okay, so now just to keep your notes organized and complete, let me define the primary motor area up here for you. And again, you can also visualize that in figure 1415, excuse me, figure 1415. Okay, the primary motor area is the area of the cerebrum that is the major control region for execution of voluntary movements. Okay. All right. Okay, folks, I'm looking at my time and I want to be sure I get certain pieces of information down into your notes. So I'm gonna push forward. I'm gonna push forward, okay? All right, so so back in chapter 16, we're under section 16.4 of the textbook, see control of body movement. If you glance your eyes in that section of text, you're going to see a subheading where it talks about control of movement by the cerebral cortex. It talks to you about the premotor cortex. It talks to you about the primary motor cortex. It also talks to you about the direct motor pathways. Okay, and so the direct motor pathways, let me just give you a couple notes about these things. And I'm going to continue at this position in your notes to try to keep this as logical and organized as possible. So the direct motor pathways, okay. The direct motor pathways, these pathways provide input to what's known as the lower motor neurons. Folks, the lower motor neurons are the neurons that basically end up coming off your brain stem, okay? So they come off your brain stem and ultimately they may connect to things that innervate the actual skeletal muscle itself, okay? So these pathways provide input to lower motor neurons via axons that extend directly from the cerebral cortex. Okay, some sub-information about these things. This pathway is made of axons that form what are known as pyramidal cells. And if you want to take a quick look at what a pyramidal cell looks like, believe it or not, it was shown to you in chapter 12 when you were reading it, although I bet you probably forget it if you even took notice of it, because there's just so much to know, right? So figure 12.4, if you want to take a quick look back, go ahead at figure 12.4, and you'll notice in figure 12.4, you'll notice panel B there is showing you a pyramidal cell. And the idea is that the cell body of the neuron has a roughly pyramid-shaped geometry to it, So the direct motor pathways provide input to the neurons that go out to your skeletal muscle. These pathways are made of axons from pyramidal cells, which are the main output cell of the cerebral cortex. Okay. There are two types of direct motor pathways. Okay, we have the corticospinal and corticobulbar pathways that we need to get into your notes. Okay, corticospinal pathways are shown to you in figure 16.10. Figure 16.10. The corticospinal pathways of figure 16.10, they carry nerve impulses for the control of your muscles in the limbs and trunk. Okay, in these pathways, as you look at these pathways in figure 16.10, notice that you will find decussation taking place. So once again, we notice that decussation does take place in this anatomy that's being highlighted in figure 16.10. So because most neurons in this pathway decussate, the right cerebral cortex controls muscles on the left side of the body and vice versa. Okay, so due to decussation, the right cerebral cortex is going to control left skeletal muscles, and the left cerebral cortex is going to control right skeletal muscles. Again, why was it necessary for Mother Nature to design it this way? There's no obvious answer that we can say, yeah, that's definitely correct. Okay, so we have the corticospinal pathways. All right. And we have, sorry that this is getting so busy, folks, but this is the nature of this chapter here. We also have the lateral corticospinal tract, excuse me. Within figure 16.10, you notice you have panel A, that is the lateral corticospinal tract, and panel B, which is the anterior corticospinal tract. Let's document these things. All right, so this is figure 16.10, part A. Okay, the lateral corticospinal tract is used to control skeletal muscles in the distal parts of your limbs, you know, fingers, toes, that are responsible for precise, agile movements of hands and feet. Okay. Yes, used to control skeletal muscles in the distal parts of limbs that are responsible for precise, agile movements of the hands and feet. So, for example, the neurons that are part of the lateral corticospinal tract are going to be heavily activated when you're playing a piano. If you're playing a piano and moving your arms and hands and fingers in very precise ways, the neurons in the lateral corticospinal tract are going to be activated. Okay, and I apologize, I'm rushing here so I can get things into your notes that I want to do. You also have the anterior corticospinal tract. This is figure 16.10, part B. This is used, the neurons that are part of this anatomical tract are used to control skeletal muscles in the trunk and proximal parts of the limbs. Right. Okay. So, you know, if you're going to be if you're going to be in aerobics class and the aerobics instructor asks you to twist your torso, you know, like this, okay, then you're going to activate neurons that are in the anterior corticospinal tract. Okay. Okay, so we have the anterior corticospinal tract that we've just documented. So we're done looking at figure 1610. Yeah, I'm going to run out of time here. I can tell I'm going to run out of time. That's okay. We'll keep rolling here. So the second direct motor pathway, the first direct motor pathway is the corticospinal pathways of figure 1610. Within those pathways, there's two tracks, and we put them in your notes. Okay. The second direct motor pathway is the corticobulbar pathway, which is figure 1611. Okay. This is used to control skeletal muscles in the head that control voluntary movements of your eyes, so looking left and right, up and down, your tongue to coordinate swallowing, and neck, as well as muscles involved in chewing when you're eating food, facial expression, you're happy, you're sad, speech, as I talk to you, neurons in the corticobulbar pathway are activating, and swallowing the food and drink that you're eating, okay? Used to control skeletal muscles in the head that control precise voluntary movements of the eyes, tongue, and neck, as well as muscles involved in chewing, facial expression, and swallowing. Okay. All right, folks, there's one section of notes that I'm not going to have time to talk to you about now. And I don't want to hold you late because of your lab exam. So what I'm going to do is, while you're taking your lab exam, I'm going to add to the notes of this document right here. And before, you know, I want to do that before I upload these notes to Wiley Plus. So when you go back to Wiley Plus to review content of chapter 16, please be sure you take a look at the additional notes that I'm going to add to this document, okay? Folks, this is the last time I'm going to have the luxury of speaking to you as a group, because, you know, next Wednesday, you're going to log into classmarker.com at 8 o'clock, take your final exam. I just want to say thank you very much for your persistence in getting through the course. Thank you for all your hard work. It is not a trivial thing, as you now know, to learn the mysteries of the human body and how it functions. It takes a tremendous amount of effort, blood, sweat, and tears to even develop a small amount of competency in this topic. So thank you for hanging in there. I wish you good luck on your lab exam, final exam. As I get those exams graded, lab exam graded and final exam graded, I'll be sending out class-wide emails to alert you when the exams have been graded. And let me simply say, I wish you nothing but the best for your future career development. And I wish you a happy holidays where you can sincerely rest and laugh a lot. Okay, laugh a lot and enjoy yourself. So folks, Take care. Maybe sometime in the future, I'll see you walking the halls of Hack. Okay? Otherwise, be well and Godspeed. See you later, folks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.